Good morning, everybody. Welcome in Barcelona. Welcome in Haarlem. Today, this is all about the era of data ownership. And it's just getting started, or has started a long time ago. At least that's what we're going to explain you a bit here. I'll first introduce you to Daniel. Daniel is CTO at Synetic. And also a long-time Drupal contributor, over 13 years, and has a passion for web technology for human beings. But next to that, he also thinks about beauty, performance, privacy, personalization, and accessibility. For now, I'll leave it to him to further introduce you to this session.
Hi, thanks, Nick, for the introduction. So, data ownership. So before we continue, let's see what we have here. A very familiar pop-up, I guess, Nick. So you agree to all kinds of terms, and if you want to continue to watch this session, please allow us to process all your data, not limited to yourselves, but including any relatives and our pets. Now, any joking aside, we are developers and we don't give any legal advice, but we have lots of experience in running our agencies and helping our clients on the and bridging all the things that we are required to do by law and what we make with our technologies. So we will tell you a bit more about that today. In Europe, we have a thing that's called GDPR, and I put a poll in this session. Let me see. What do you all think about when we say data ownership? I see there are people also mentioning GDPR, so it's a well-known subject. Yeah, but it started all earlier, long time before GDPR became into effect. So we have a little timeline for you guys. It's from my experience, it started all in Germany, and the graph tells you as well. Already in 1970, they started thinking about privacy, because we are talking about data ownership in regard to your personal data here. And in my experience as a developer, I also experienced that when I was creating websites for German clients. They were the first that, for example, had to block your Facebook like widget and give consent before using that widget. While in the Netherlands, we were just putting all these free widgets everywhere. So, but it started long time before, in 1970 in Germany. And along the way, we adopted technology more and more and more. It became more embedded into our lives. More and more data was collected. So more regulation was also introduced. I think Europe was in the forefront of these types of regulation. What you see here is the red line is the technology in our lives becoming more and more important. And the blue line are some important points in history where the regulation became more strict or certain events happened. So in the European Union in 1995, we had a Data Protection Act. Then we had more and more data that was sent to, for example, the United States. So we had to think about something to safeguard your data, and what's called safe harbor. Later it was invalidated because we couldn't be sure that it was really safe. There were a lot of frequent data breaches in the 2000s. Think about what happened with WikiLeaks, Chelsea Manning. Yeah, it became apparent to the big public that there was a lot of data collection. So they call it mass surveillance disclosure by different agencies, but also by companies collecting data and more data. So in 2016, we had GDPR adopted, and a few years ago, it became effective. And even this year, not only in Europe, but also in the United States, the California Consumer Privacy Act came into effect. And I'll tell you a bit more about that, what it means. So the GDPR, it means we'll be more more in control about our own data. So if you follow this circle on the screen, we have the rights of the data subject. This means that you can always access your own personal data, whoever holds it, and they need to tell you in time what they hold and give it to you. There are also lots of penalties now. So if you're not on time or you're not safely securing the data, you can get fined. It's also applicable worldwide. So it's not only for if you're in the European Union, but also if you're running a company somewhere else on the world and you have visitors, for example, on your websites or clients that are from the European Union, you have to give them the same options, for example, to be in control about their own personal data. And this is a big thing. So let's continue. Nick, one last thing, for example, the California Privacy Act that is is actual now. Big difference is that in the European Union, you have to give prior consent, for example, to allow companies to collect personal data. And in California, that's not the case, but you have the same rights like getting your data or opting out later. So,
yeah, maybe some small but important thing that we forgot to mention: we're not lawyers, and we cannot help you if you get into trouble. We merely try to solve this by technical challenges or technical solutions in a way that we think fits the law, but you also have to assist yourself with guidance from legal people. But anyway, even so, as a consumer, the question is like, is the picture that I share on Facebook, is the app that I'm using, is that data mine? Even in most modern times, with the whole Corona crisis, everybody installs the application to maybe check if you're in contact with someone else. Like, do you quite understand like what kind of data or flows between all these different apps are happening? With the Corona app, lots of public surveillance, or there's lots of public investigation on what's actually happening with that data has happened, but not so much for private company apps. Now, to give you an example, I tried yesterday to age myself with the Face app application, and you can see apparently I have a future ahead of myself as Santa Claus. But ultimately, I uploaded this image to the cloud. I accepted some privacy policy that is very long, and then some end result came up. How do I know what is now happening with my face? And that was the whole discussion that happened 2 years ago with exactly this Face app, because the internet was abuzz with Face app, as this quote mentions, and not so much because this was a new thing, what was happening with data and apps. The strange thing that happened here was that the location of the app builder was actually in Russia, and then according to some media and all things Russia is quote unquote obviously bad. We see that in movies as well. It's always the bad Russians that are trying bad things. So even American senators involved were figuring out what is going on with my face or with my picture. But there was some security research then done, and the consensus came from the security research was, well, the app doesn't really do anything different from any other app like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, any of those. So they were not really bad Russians. This is actually what all these apps are doing. And then ultimately, you don't quite know what's happening with your data. So to move along to that point, does data even have borders? And I think I leave it back to you, Daniel.
Let's dive into that example of yours. So we have a map of the world here, and see what happens with your data. So does your data have borders? We live in a global world, and this is a very nice example of what's happening here. So in this case, there was a picture taken in Spain, processed at Amazon in Germany and Singapore, while the owner of the picture is from Brazil, the cloud company is from the USA, and the app vendor is from Russia. So yeah, big bad Russia, quote unquote. But yeah, the whole world is almost involved. So what you see is you need a kind of chain of trust in what happens with your data. And it's really hard to have this chain of trust because once your data is on the loose, it's very hard to tame. So another example about taming this data, governments are trying to protect their citizens. So we have the GDPR, but we also have, for example, the recent examples of Trump administration trying to ban TikTok, WeChat, and in Europe we are, for example, trying to protect our citizens while building infrastructure of 5G, for example, and not allowing UA components in the critical infrastructure. So these are all examples of governments trying to protect their citizens and not trusting other nations. But the data is global. It's out there, and it's very hard to tame. And it's not only the United States or Europe. For example, India was the first to ban a lot of Chinese apps. So for the Western world, yeah, okay, Russia may be evil like in the movies, but China is also very scary, it seems. But also India is concerned about their personal data. So it's a global issue. Governments are trying to pick it up. Awareness is growing, and we have to see what happens. Okay, let's talk about, are your systems open? Because what can we do to tame this flood of data or give you more control about what happens with data? And that can only be done if systems are open. If all systems are closed, the trail of data is very unclear. You don't know what happens. And if it's out there, maybe in a black box, how do you get it out? What needs to change in this regard? So from the GDPR, we have 2 rights, which I will give you as an example. It's the right of access by data subject. Can we have the next one? And the right to data portability. So in summary, that means if a company or application collects your data as a European citizen, you are always allowed to request this data. So ask the company, what do you store about me? And give that data to me in a format that's portable, that I can reuse. And yeah, we need APIs for that, because manually doing things like this will be very labor intensive. And there are lots of companies doing this, and they need to do this because you need to give a response in 30 days. And in cases that you can say it's very complex to retrieve this data, and it's often the case because lots of companies are using CRM, marketing automation, lots of different tools. You can get 2 months, but it's still hard work. If there are a lot of requests, it's hard to keep up. So we need open systems to able to cope with these kinds of requests and allow everybody his rights. One nice example, I have a personal grudge with the Dutch firm. It's called the Dutch Credit Registration Bureau, and it registers all credits you have. And before GDPR, it collected all credits from different companies, and as a citizen, you weren't allowed to see what they registered about you. So as a student, I wasn't allowed to get a credit card, for example, because of my personal score. And I found that strange, because I didn't know about anything that could influence my score like this, that I wasn't allowed to get a credit card. And I tried to retrieve my personal data, and it wasn't possible. And since GDPR, the Dutch Data Protection Authority, they even fined this bureau about 1 million US dollars, and that's a big fine. So there are examples in the wild that things that were allowed in the past aren't allowed anymore. And yeah, this will be going on for a while and being more strict in the future. So what do we need? We need the APIs like to allow all these exchanges. So if we're talking about your data, I had this example and I found that my credits are part of my personal data. I wasn't allowed to retrieve it. And there's more and more data collection in the wild. And you have to ask yourself, is this data from me? Because there are things happening like collection via analytics. We can see in the next slide that are less obvious, but also obviously we're sometimes giving data like pictures or presentations to platforms. For example, this will be on YouTube, for example, but you probably also have pictures on Instagram or Facebook. So you're giving your data away. And the question is it still your data? So always look to the licenses of these platforms. In case of an image, probably it's still your image, but you can never revoke the right for usage of these images. So it's hard to see what happens with your data. And for example, in case of the tracking I mentioned, and you see a complicated picture before, it's not really obvious what's happening. And because of that, more and more vendors of technology, like browser vendors, are, for example, changing how they work and protecting the users. So this is the difference, what you see in, for example, first-party and third-party data, in which third-party data is all the data that is not directly, that's collected not directly with the first company you have a relationship with, but with another party. And another example is the Facebook like button I mentioned previously. Facebook was able to track you all over the internet. And collecting your data. And this is something that will become harder and harder, and also will be a thing for marketeers to keep in mind, because the browsers, for example, Firefox and Safari are already blocking these kinds of tracking. But a big thing in 2022 is that also Chrome will be blocking a collection of third-party data in this way. And Chrome is, I think, about 70% of the web usage, so there will be a big impact, and that's, I think, nice to see how vendors are creating technology that protects the user. And there are other initiatives. The founder of the web is also thinking about how can we protect their users' data. And he came up with the Solid project. And it's the idea that all your personal information lives in your personal vault, or in a pod, it's called here. And you have access to and only access to this vault unless you give another party access to the data stored in this vault. So you could say, Facebook, okay, I will give you my images, but I store them in my vault and you can use them, and any time later I can revoke this access and you cannot use it again. So this will put you in control of your data again. This will be a big shift in how we think about data, and also needs a lot of investments to allow this. So this will probably not happen very soon, but with regulations becoming more and more strict, we will probably see initiatives like this being more, I think it will be more possible that we see these things success. All right, let's get on what we can do.
Yeah.
Now.
And then maybe as a marketeer or as a person like trying to implement feature request or an RFP, you get an RFP in your digital agency and asking for, okay, I want the website and I also need to connect it to marketing automation, whether if it's HubSpot or anything else. and personalization. And please also advise me on the legal impact, because I heard Chrome is making some changes. So just make sure that it works. Well, obviously, that's today not a very simple feat. Now, what do consumers expect today? And you might look at yourself and you expect it as well from very popular web shops like Zalando, or in Europe, or in the Netherlands and Belgium, like Coolblue, or yeah, even Amazon and Bol.com. Some of those examples you know or might not know, but they're kind of united in one thing, is that they're very personal. They send you personal marketing automation campaigns. Also, the website is kind of like tweaked to your likings, but those are just e-commerce sites. There's also different kind of applications or websites online. But even your television, if you don't change your setting of your digital recorder, I assume some of you have that at home, you will see personalized advertisements on your own television. You can disable it here in Belgium, but by default, it's enabled. And most of the consumers do actually expect this kind of personalization. And it also is shown that brands who use this data-driven campaigns to deliver this are seeing that result. They are seeing higher conversions. So use deep data, analyze that data, use data scientists, use parts of machine learning or artificial intelligence to just make sense of that data, and then add that behavioral component. But as we also saw in the previous slides, don't do this without the consent or the information of your end user, because you might end up in a situation where people are anxious or scared of using your service. So it's a very fine balance. And what is also happening in the world is that the CMS is now rebranded to DXP. And that's because websites aren't enough anymore. Right? You need to have a website that is also connected to that marketing automation. You have to move away from maybe MailChimp to do fully integration with that website, with the forms. And that's like one example, but also towards personalization, towards analytics. And you can see this is what Gartner defines as the capabilities of that DXP. Now, ultimately, how we kind of split it up in three parts is that there's a CMS part, a Drupal part. There's a customer data platform where you collect all that data, and again, after consent. And then also marketing automation, open marketing automation. What I'm going to explain you here is our recipe for how to tackle this challenge in an open and accessible way, so that we can keep within first-party data and don't have to resort to services that require us to add third-party data tracking on our browser, because we know that already in Safari and Firefox, this is blocked. Like whatever you do, it's blocked. And even if you ask consent, in Chrome Incognito, this is also already blocked. So we have to resort to first-party data solutions. And then this is our take on that problem. It doesn't mean that this is the only take on that exact problem. But how can you do this yourself? We can start to use Mautic for marketing automation. Mautic is a very powerful open source marketing automation platform, also built in PHP. And then we can use Apache Unomi, which is actually our customer data platform. It collects every kind of event, and you can think of it like Google Analytics without any dashboards or UI. It just has all the data in there, and then you can connect it to different kind of solutions. Then obviously for the CMS parts, we are at DrupalCon, so we're using Drupal at its full power. And then also to connect these three technologies, we use a Unomi Drupal module, Mautic form embedding. We don't use Drupal web forms, we use Mautic forms. It means that all the forms can be created by the marketeer itself, also going towards a self-service model for that content editor or the marketeer. And then best practices in regards to cookie policies and Drupal with Dropsolid Rocketship and Dropsolid Rocketship GDPR cookie compliance. All of this, what I'm showing you, is open source. So there's nothing hidden here. The only additional piece that we're adding to that mix is artificial intelligence to make sense of that data. And that's specific to the Dropsolid platform. But outside of that, everything is open and can be either self-hosted or maybe be bought by a managed service, similar as how we saw that Solid project. The Solid project, maybe to get back to that, is also allowing you to either self-host your data pod, as similar as how you can host your Unomi or whatever data platform, but it also allows you to have some managed service data pod, so that hosting parties like Amazon or maybe the smaller hosting parties can actually provide you access to your pod, but with that added insurance that it's your data and nobody is able to access that. Next to all of that, we also have a couple of other components that we can use to complete the picture. And Google Analytics is a great tool from Google. However, it is third-party tracking. It does add a script to your site, and data will be sent exclusively for your site to Google Analytics, but you actually don't have any control on what is happening with that data or with that analytics. And you can be sure that it's being used for big data analytics to understand what's going on the web. If we want to take ownership of that data, so that's what it's all about, we can use tools like Matomo, which is an alternative for analytics, very, very powerful, that gives you more or less the same view, and is already used by more than 1 million websites. So there's no reason not to try it out. And also for governmental projects, this could be a very, very powerful set of tools to make sure that you protect the data of your citizens. Not only restricted to governmental projects, obviously, but we will see this also in the private sector as we move along on this slider of data ownership. And then for the development parts, there's also Node.js connectors and PHP connectors for the customer data platform. If we bring all of that together, we have a platform, or a DXP as we call it, that is in full ownership of your customer, that needs management in a similar way as Drupal is working today. You're not questioning Drupal today, so why wouldn't you try these components out? So that's one part. And then if you want us all in a managed service fashion, at Dropsolid, we can help you get there, and we provide all these tools in a managed service fashion, but you're always the owner of the data, you're always the owner of the code. And we also allow you to even do the deployment or just figure out what's going on. So with that, I'd like to conclude maybe together with Daniel with the question, are you ready to make a difference? Are we able to give up some parts of the initial ease of use of maybe Google Analytics or other parts in favor of data ownership? And it won't be an easy trajectory, but we do see this shift going on. And Drupal is already in our life for more than 20 years, and it has made a really big impact. So I think that was just the beginning. I don't know if you have any other remarks, Daniel.
No, maybe concerning Drupal, if you want to contribute in this regard. I know there are some initiatives talking about a consent framework in Drupal. There are a lot of contributed modules that are trying to solve your GDPR issues, besides even other tools like what you just presented for personalization and marketing automation, just the CMS. Yeah, Drupal is used worldwide, but in Europe, and if you have European visitors, you need more. And out of the box, there's not a lot to manage this. So it would be, yeah, I think great if core Drupal has more out of the box to solve these issues. And there are some initiatives around. And I think if you check out the GDPR group, it's a project, you see lots of examples of contributed modules that help you in this regard.
Right, yeah. So hopefully this was inspiring for everybody. I don't see a lot of questions yet, but if there's any questions, you can find us at Slack or the Dropsolid booth here within DrupalCon or on Twitter for more Q&A. Please write your questions also in the questions of the Q&A portal right now, and maybe you can still answer them in the remaining time. Other than that, just to conclude the presentation, while maybe we're waiting for some questions, please join us for contribution opportunities on this Friday. So hashtag Drupal contributions. And then please take your time to complete the survey of this session to let us know what you think. So maybe we can improve this towards the future. And I still don't see any questions, but
you always explain things so well, Nick.
yes. Yeah, so, and we now have consent to do whatever with you and your relatives and pets. So you'll see more of us very soon in your living room. Okay. Elaine, do you want to conclude anything?
It seems indeed that that your presentation was very clear, as there are no questions from the audience. And it seems also that the audience is not really worrying about their crypto wallets or ultrasonic beacons, but they are worrying about GDPR and the cookies, which actually all your talk was about. So that's what we can see in the poll. So no, unless there are other questions, I think we can end the session here. I just want to mention that indeed Nick and Daniel will be available right after the session in our booth, in the Dropsolid booth, for one-on-one conversations, or if there's still any questions left, don't hesitate to reach out to us via the Dropsolid booth, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for joining.
See you around. Don't forget to stretch your legs.